So we're going to be talking, having a little conversation on the ROI, unearthing the ROI of your efficient building. So as we get going, you've just been introduced to myself. I'm a director for Sutherland Engineers in Nairobi. Originally, I trained as an architect, crossed to the dark side, so to speak, and I now head up the facade division within our company. Hence my interest and passion for efficiency and all things green around buildings. Myles, you were introduced to already, and Dhruv as well. Azmeena is a new face for you. Azmeena is the general manager for PDM. I thought as an intro point, it would be fun to just chat about what it is about this conference. We're all in different areas, from a owner, financier, owner, general manager. What is it about efficient buildings and maximizing investments? That kind of, what is it, that passion that brings you to sit here today?
So I suppose from an IHS perspective, it's very much that in terms of our fund requirements and fund mandate, that we have a specific target of green homes that we have to deliver to the market. And this is backed up by a few of our big supporters and investors that have obviously closed into the fund, to mention the IFC specifically, and KFW, who are obviously staunch drivers of green buildings, and also the EDGE program into the African market. As I mentioned, the target that we're looking at is about 6,000 homes that we need to deliver to the market over time. And where it effectively comes from is that there is some level of blended finance that attaches itself to the fund. So when looking at ROI and effectively the investment case of it, in terms of that capital portion to green units, that incremental cost is that there is some element of blended finance there.
I think it comes back to our philosophy as a group is don't build anything you won't use yourself. It's as simple as that. So if circumstances were different, and we couldn't afford that nice house with the couple of acres of garden or whatever, I should be quite happy living in that apartment that we built, or working in that office space that we built, or going to that shopping center that was there. And it's as simple as that. So what do I want? And green is, so I guess it's more of an intangible return on investment, which is the social side. You heard me talk a little bit about earlier that green or sustainability actually shouldn't cost anymore. So in fact, from that point of view, the return on investment is more or less infinite on that marginal additional cost. And I think we have to impose a discipline on that.
PDM is part of the Aga Khan Development Network, and all of our projects have to have a positive social and environmental impact. So, basically we look at sustainability and green features for our projects, whether or not they get certified in any respect on each and every project that we have. In fact, we now have an in-house EDGE expert, and we'd like to get some expertise also in Green Star certification. So, for me, this is promoting what we think is the right thing to do, advocating for it, and hopefully understanding that it is the way of the future. We may not have an option in a few years except to build sustainable green buildings.
So we're going to talk about ROI today, return on investment. And I think ROI is a term that immediately brings up ideas of financial measures. Depending on your position in the development model, whether you're a financier or a developer or a building owner, or in fact a design professional, your understanding of ROI is very, very different, and depending on your outcome. So if we start off in saying ROI is a financial indicator that we all understand, what are the other metrics that you might use to gauge whether your ROI your project is successful from an ROI point of view?
I think where it's been quite interesting for us is that we pass a lot of that benefit and that financial benefit onto the end user or onto the homeowner at the end of the day. So in terms of unlocking it, yes, we assist them to obviously gain the financial benefit and to obviously get the reduced cost on the utilities. But it's not necessarily something that us as a project owner takes ownership of in terms of the financial return. So as we go through the process of delivering these homes to the market and effectively quantifying what that ROI looks like, we've always put ourselves in a position to pass that benefit on to homeowners, home users, tenants, etc. Again, in terms of the financial metrics, I think as more data starts to come about in the market, as we can better understand exactly what that financial benefit is, we're going to better understand what that window looks like and how quickly it can be paid back.
Okay, so maybe just to take that one step further, the benefit you're seeing is being passed on, but in some way that must be returning back to yourselves as a benefit to your company.
I think we've recalibrated our mindset in terms of how we deliver product to the market.
Yeah.
So in terms of green buildings, it's become business as usual for IHS. Us and putting ourselves in the position again to deliver or effectively build stock which can be EDGE compliant or green compliant is very much the strategy of the business today. In terms of what we're delivering to the market, and again the demand that the market is starting to see, is that we are unlocking benefit and equity and value to the homeowners. So I suppose it comes back to, in an affordable space where you're delivering large-scale projects to the market, does your unit or does your complex or development, does it demand a higher demand from users, from tenants, from homeowners? And we're definitely starting to see that manifest in the market at the moment by giving them a better quality unit.
I think just going through the process as business as usual says something about you as a developer. And ultimately, what are we doing? We're selling perhaps the largest purchase a person will ever make in his life, right? And if you aren't buying a quality product, I mean, that's literally what the customer wants. So if that quality is translated somehow into your brand value over time, I mean, it's not, you're right. I mean, it is a journey, it is a process. I think for us, that's one of the other metrics that will deliver tangible benefit in terms of perhaps a faster sales cycle, perhaps a slightly uplift in price, or at least not a downlift in a tough market. There are words such as downlift, and that sort of thing. So I think so the other ROI consideration, I think we also have to look at the risk side. And you're a Cape Townian, right? I don't know if your projects are in
Cape Townian as well,
right?
And my projects are in Cape Town.
Right. And the flip side to return is always risk, isn't it?
Yeah.
And has your project actually been de-risked in such a stressful water environment? Is perhaps the question I'd have to ask.
Yeah.
If you have low flush toilets and all that, are your homeowners getting by less painfully than perhaps the guy in the an older build? That's the question I would like to ask you. Have you de-risked your project, in fact, without realizing it?
It's just to be responsible in terms of what we're delivering to the market. And again, I agree with your point and your message in that it's become effectively the principles and the values of our business is to deliver good quality stock. And that can be obviously measured on different levels. But in terms of de-risking a project or de-risking a unit and delivering the market something that, again, is relevant to the circumstances that they live and function in, and especially when it's in home ownership. As you've mentioned now, that is probably the most important purchase that someone's going to make in their life, is to buy their home. So we've definitely seen it. We've seen it in terms of the rental demand that our projects still attract. We've seen it in terms of the sales cycles that we go through, where people still want to buy homes from us. So yes, there's definitely a benefit that's actually carried over and that's started to build itself into our projects, and that we are realizing, not only from a return on investment, like I said, and what the payback period is, but just in terms of a demand for that type of product in the market.
Okay.
When it comes to return on investments, I think in spite of the positive social and environmental impact, for PDM even, it just boils down to bottom line, right? And we have certain hurdle rates that we have to meet for ROI. So when our first green project was being developed, we made a decision to do a quality project, like Dhruv said. We did a financial model and we established parameters in which we could meet our hurdle rate. Now, whether we were lucky or not, the decision to get certified, LEED certified, came after the fact. But early enough that the whole design process was based on achieving green certification. We've actually completed the project and met our hurdle rate which was based on a specific payback period, but that didn't take into account the benefits of going green and sustainability and energy and utility savings. So it is hoped that, that's my phone, I'm sorry. It is hoped that that we will actually exceed our anticipated ROI. So I think based on how the data turns out and how well we're able to measure it, once the building has been operating for several years, we may actually find that we exceeded that ROI, but that remains to be seen.
So is that as a perspective as a building owner looking at capital cost versus running costs? Is that where you're kind of measuring your ROI?
Well, we do projects for sale and we do projects for retention. So when we're looking at projects for retention, we don't look at it beyond the payback period. So our ROI is based on, we're going to build it, it's going to take us whatever, 7 to 10 to 12 years for payback, and that's the window we look at. And again, like I said, with no data on what the potential savings could be, we've just used our historical operations costs to measure that ROI or to develop that ROI.
I think it's actually a trap, your question. A nice one, Sean. It's actually a trap because, frankly, if you're looking at capex versus operating, only because you're going to own the building over that period, what does that say about you when you're going to sell the property in a 2-year period? Are you going to compromise on the quality is the question that straight away comes in my mind. So it doesn't matter what the life of the building is, and in terms of, it doesn't really matter who's owning the building. It only matters what is the life of the building and have you done it right up front. Otherwise, you end up in these little compromises that suddenly start adding up, and 2 years later, the guy who's actually owning the poor thing is going to hate you. And I promise you, they're going to hate you.
I think that's exactly the point, that many models, the developers who will build with the intention of selling immediately. So the focus there is on the first year return on investment. Within a market that's slightly more mature, people are understanding what you say, Dhruv. They've got to the 2 years and they realize their cheap building is now costing a fortune to run, or that it's attracting less tenants. And those factors start to then play into the market. So it's really about how to quickly get a market up to speed, understanding that quality that you're going to put into a building really has value wherever you are in the chain, if you're from financing through to that developing to sell or developing to retain. My personal point of view is actually slightly different. As a facade engineer, I'm very focused on the people who are going to be in the building as employees way down the line. One of the stories that I like to tell is, we all know what it's like to sit in a car in front of your hot dashboard and you're miserable and you road raged, and by the time you get home, you're not a nice person. Buildings are the same. You sit in uncomfortable conditions and you spend 8 hours a day at least of your life being thoroughly abused by the conditions. By the time you get home, you are going to be mean to your children, probably kick the dog. For me, if we can make buildings that allow people to get home and have a more friendly interaction with their families, for me that's a return on investment and a huge benefit. But those kind of factors, those people, immeasurable factors, mostly are overlooked. It's unfortunate Ritu wasn't able to join us because she looks at environmental and social aspects of development. But how do you think we should be thinking about those kind of things, recognizing that buildings are actually about the people who are going to sit in them and use them?
Us as developers or project owners or people who deliver stock to the market have a responsibility to deliver something that's comfortable for people to live in, that people obviously want to stay in. I think that when you look at it, and again, as you've mentioned, is that too many people do look at a scenario financially or commercially and say, well, if I'm building it today and I'm building it for X and I'm selling it for Y, then my margin is this, and let's carry on for life, and I've made my buck and I walk on and carry on, and I don't really worry too much about it. But you can already see that, and again, I suppose it's part of the process with us now looking at this as business as usual, is that the market is starting to recalibrate. People are starting to reconfigure their mindset as to what is the responsible thing to do, what is the sustainable thing to do. Again, in terms of quantifying ROI, and I think as we start to build this data set, as mentioned now, is that, well, what do we peg operational cost on? It's based on last year's costings, which are non-green. That's my best case scenario. What do I look at in terms of equity, whether I'm the person realizing the value in the market on the sale of my own unit after my hold or my ownership period, or the equity and the value that I'm creating for a first-time homeowner? Again, as the market starts to mature, we're going to start to understand exactly what that is in terms of numbers, in terms of monetary return as well. So there is a bit of a progression that the market clearly needs to go through. We had quite an interesting conversation, it was a few months ago at a workshop where we were talking about the secondary market. And I think Muddy was part of that conversation as well, is to say, well, what are we seeing in terms of delivery of green units to the secondary market? And, my answer, or my very, kind of blunt, facetious answer is that, well, we're not even there yet. We're going through primary sales at the moment where we're delivering first units into the market, and most of those are on rental. We're going through the process now where we're delivering first green home-owned units to first-time homeowners. So there is a long way to go before all of this catches up and we can actually start to make sense around what is return of investment, what does that mean, and what are the kind of qualitative aspects that you can attach to the monetary quantitative ones as well.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. We are early in the process, and we do need to be conscious that we need to collect more data. At the moment, I think we're in that space between anecdotal, in other words, project by project. I heard a great story to a bit more of a unified, because otherwise we wouldn't be in this presentation and trying to learn more. The learning is now more than one phone call away, if I can put it that way. But beyond becoming a whole data set, that's still going to be some time. But I think the other thing that's just worth really keeping in mind is that the world is getting disrupted much quicker than we think. Much quicker than we think. If I'm sitting with a cement supplier, 6 months ago, taking me around a project to say that, I fully believe that the structural cost of building a building in 5 years will actually be 30% less than it is today. And therefore that project that comes on stream at that time will make a profit at your cost of build today, right? You get my point. You've been disrupted, in effect.
Yeah.
Your ROI case, what ROI? You're actually not fit for market now. And I think that disruption will come far quicker than we think if we're not thinking in an agile manner, for want of a better word. And I think let's move this conversation away from cost, if I may. We all talk about cost. It's value engineering. That's why, sorry, Sean, and we're not paying Sutherland engineers for the piece of paper that comes out the other end, so we build the thing. We're actually paying you guys. I won't mention how much, but we're happy. And Amrish and everybody else around this room is really, what are we paying for? Is that value engineering thought process. How do we deliver that to the end customer at a price that we can afford and will be sustainably affordable going forward as well?
Yeah.
So, and that's really, and we have to move away from this thing about fees are a cost. This certification fee is a cost. No, it's an investment. Think about the return on investment on your fees, for God's sake. If I'm going to save, 0.5% on your fees, right, and get a me-too copy-paste design, why did you even start the project? Sorry, not a plug for the consulting side, but it's actually true.
So I agree with that, but I'm going to go back to Sean's original question about the intangible benefits. And the word responsible has come up several times, and I think that's a really important word. It's responsible development, it's doing the right thing, and it's educating through advocacy and other means to make developers and owners and users aware of the importance of those intangible benefits. We may not be able to precisely measure them, but they're there, and we will see them, right? So I think it's really important to be well aware of those added values.
But by the way, government does get it. Some of them. I mean, not all of them, but some of them are actually very keen on doing the right thing. How we implement it is a different thing. That's an educational thing. But actually, just to bring in that, responsible part I heard from one of the other panelists saying it has to start with government. I think it starts everywhere, but I just quote former Deputy Governor Polycarp. He actually said that the rickets problem in Nairobi is the highest out of any of the counties. Why? Because kids go home. Your point about kicking the dog coming home. Actually, the home environment is so bad they're not getting enough sunlight.
Yeah.
And that's a fundamental thing that we're not even looking at is our health.
Absolutely. So it's interesting we're talking about quantifying things and responsibilities. I think one of the advantages of being where we are at this particular moment in Kenya and starting to look at these issues is that other parts of the world have looked at these issues well before us. And so instead of just staring forward into a void and trying to make it up as we go, there are actually examples to look back on. So in South Africa is a good 10 years ahead of where this market is, and Australia even another sort of 7-8 years before that. I remember some years back looking with the South African Green Building Council, and Elizabeth, you and I have spoken about this quite some time back, the kind of metrics about the overall life cycle cost of a building. In broad terms, and this came out of research in Australia on buildings, so it's many, many years of data collected and then quantified. On a rough scale, the primary capital cost of a building is a 1. Compared to that, the energy costs, the running costs of that building are a 10 over the life cycle cost of the building. The people cost of the building who are going to occupy that building for the same period is 100. So you got literally from 1 for the cost of the building, through 10 for the running costs, through 100 for the cost of the people. So on those kind of metrics, it's very clear that a saving of 10% of your running costs over the life of a building negates the full cost of the building the project in the beginning. But even that is minuscule compared to the cost of the people and your ability to retain good staff, encourage good people to join your building. I think everyone in the room would know the example of Google and how people are falling over themselves to go and work there because of the unusual building environment. How do you think that kind of thinking can be translated into this local market, the ability to type something in Google and find out information? Do you think we could leapfrog the kind of 15 years of time frame that the Australians took to get to that level of understanding?
It's exponential though.
Yeah.
You look at the kind of ratchet up and the levels that it impacts on, and like you said, the people who either live or who occupy or who stand behind the building or development or whatever it is, that's effectively the most expensive or costly matrix out of the whole setup. What is it about? It's about creating a happy living environment at the end of the day. All right? And it's about starting small and effectively making sure that message flows through again to the operating costs and again to the people who either occupy, live, own, tenant, whatever it is, in terms of the unit. What we've done, and again, the learning curve has been extremely steep over the last 3 years, and we've put a lot of effort and energy into educating the market. As I mentioned earlier, there have been endless workshops, and that's across the board in terms of stakeholders. Property managers, asset managers, internal to IHS, professionals, developers, bankers, whoever it is. And again, making sure that the message gets to the end user to make sure that they use the unit in the correct way and that they're happy with what they're getting at the end of the day. Whether it be a purchase or whether it be to rent, is that they're happy in the home that they're living in at the end of it. In terms of the cost and you talk around what it is that you're saving or how much capital you're putting in, and Prashant touched on it a little bit earlier. I suppose the exciting thing that we've been through is that we've seen as low as about a 1% additional cost in terms of capital expenditure on our projects to make sure that the projects are effectively green or that they're EDGE compliant or certified. So it isn't as material and significant as you think it is. But the benefit that you pass on to the people that live in it is obviously hugely significant, again, especially in the affordable space. So it's going to be a constant education. We're going to have to fill in the gaps over time. We're going to have to constantly update what is best practice? What can we do better in terms of those units? Is there something that we're not thinking about? And I think it's just to not be complacent over time just because we're building a certain way. We're going to have to revisit it, take a look at it, and make sure that we're still doing what should be done, and make sure that that message gets to the market as well.
Are we there yet? Not quite. That, you know, somebody will come and apply to your office just because your office is in a great environment. I don't think we're quite there yet. But we're in this great time of choice, you know, because there's an oversupply in almost all the sectors in Nairobi, I think. But a lot of it is actually not fit for purpose, as we know. So the conversation today is revolving around parking ratios, just for example. Now it's moving. I promise you, it's not even, do you have that correct number of parking? Is it the correct size parking? Can I actually fit my car in without having to be an expert driver? You know, so I can get it inch perfect in without scraping, you know, off, you know, that sort of stuff is now happening, which sounds really basic, but it actually also comes through at the end that I've actually thought about my building. That's what we're talking about. Comfort levels, certainly. I think, you know, if you can't open your window in Nairobi, then where can you do it in the world? You know, so one of those things. I'll give you one anecdote, which might. We can't control what's going around our new building, capital M, but we can certainly control what's going in it. So we've actually built an atrium. So it's, you know, 15 floors of atrium. So at least we know there will be light and sunlight and airflow and all the rest of it. It doesn't matter what goes around us. Everybody will still have access to that. And it's a small thing, right? But I think it's something that I feel that will keep adding value over the years, as time changes. So things to think about for the future. I think people will appreciate that lay-by where you can be Ubered in and out very quickly rather than that parking spot in future. I think we'll need to think about repurposing our basements to apartments or other space or more fun spaces. You know, we've put in a squash court in ours, for example, in a non-space. I think those basements will disappear. I think the new generation, let's be very clear, are with us. There'll be more renting type models, you know, like rather than ownership. So they'll love that new car, but they won't necessarily own it. And you know, all of this stuff will really come into our space as well quicker than we think.
To answer your question directly on the learning curve, I think there's been enough of a foundation laid now that, and given key learnings from the rest of the world, I think in Kenya and other countries in sub-Saharan Africa, South Africa being the exception because they're already ahead of the game, I think the learning curve is going to be exponential, right? So it's not going to take us, let's hope, 10 or 15 years to get there. It's going to take us maybe 5 or 7 years to get there, or sooner, let's hope. But I wanted to comment on Dhruv's comment about parking spots. We actually put bicycle parking and parking for electrically chargeable cars in Vienna Port. And I think you're going to see more and more of that as well, right? You're going to not have the really big parking spots, but the parking spots for more environmentally friendly transportation. So
some key points that I'm hearing, it's about quality. It's really about producing better quality buildings and using the kind of data that you're collecting as a measure for persuading people to purchase a unit. And I'm sure in the commercial space, that data we're collecting on running buildings will be what you use to convince clients to spend that additional money. Do you think it's feasible, just as a last thought, that we can really get people to understand that the value that we hold as custodians of the built environment, that what decisions we make now affect the generation. You spoke about the next generation. Really, it's about the way that the decisions we make now are shaping our cities, and how we can very quickly change and spin it around into making environments that are much more sustainable. And it's not only about water scarcity or electricity certainty, but it's about all of the soft and fuzzy things that we can create addition to better communities.
Again, no matter what market you're in or where you find yourself in terms of, you know, the demographic, is that when it is relevant, you need to obviously take a look at how you can be responsible and what that impact is going to be on the environment. You rewind, 7-8 years ago to the ESCOM crisis and how long that took also, but what's come out of that is how sustainable electricity is going forward. And I think with water as well, in Cape Town specifically, as a kind of case study, you know, everyone's changed their mindset in terms of what the sustainability of water will be going forward. So again, you see it in our developments. It's definitely something that we consider. We're trying to be responsible when it comes to that. And again, will it benefit people in the future? Most definitely so, because I think the kind of base has been set then, and the groundwork's been set for a more responsible, you know, type of person going forward, and how they look at the environment, how they look at consumption, you know, and so forth.
You know, change is one person at a time, obviously, but the faster you communicate it, I think you're absolutely right about the disruption that's going to happen, because the speed of adoption is fascinating. It really is. From the conversation we even had 6 months ago about, you know, how is the contractor disposing of his waste? There's no complaints anymore, and I'm pretty damn sure that somebody else, when he goes for a pitching for another job, he's going to go and say, I know how to dispose of my waste properly. You know, and you know, all the other, I'm just using one tiny example. And suddenly, it just, the easier you make it for somebody else to do, the easier they'll feel it is, and it's like a virus, it'll communicate itself. So all we have to do is just, well, you know, keep talking about it, I think.
Yeah, I think I'm totally in agreement. It's just creating awareness, and platforms like this are a start, a really good start to that, right?
Great. Thank you for your time, your input, and yeah,
Thank you, Sean.
that's it. Thanks for